Pay attention to this security camera footage. October 14, 2008, on the outskirts of Chicago. The grainy tape captures a woman in clear distress stumbling under the yellow glow of a streetlight. That is Maria Santos, a 26-year-old single mother. She is walking alone, clutching a bruised arm and wiping tears from her face, having just fled a violent domestic assault. At 2:15 a.m., a Ford Crown Victoria patrol cruiser slowly pulls into the frame. Sergeant David Thorne, 38 years old, steps out. He looks like the definition of safety crisp uniform, calm demeanor, and a reassuring smile. He doesn't treat her like a suspect. He treats her like someone who needs protection. Maria doesn't hesitate. She trusts the badge. You see her nod in gratitude, bypass the cage in the back seat, and climb into the front passenger side. She believes she has finally been rescued. But she has no idea that Officer Thorne had turned off his radio and spent the previous 90 minutes prowling these streets, hunting for prey. At 2:19 a.m., the cruiser drives away into the darkness. Maria Santos has less than 30 minutes left to live. Pay attention to the woman walking alone on the edge of the screen. It is October 14th, 2008, a Tuesday morning that feels colder than the thermometer suggests. The location is the industrial outskirts of Chicago, where the city grid begins to fray into empty lots and silent warehouses. The woman is Maria Santos. She is 26 years old, strikingly beautiful, and currently terrified. Under the harsh yellow glow of the streetlights, you can see she is underdressed for the weather, clutching her arms against the wind, but the cold is the least of her worries. If the camera resolution were higher, you would see the fresh bruise darkening on her left bicep and the tear tracks cutting through her makeup. She is walking fast, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, expecting to see a familiar car roaring down the pavement to drag her back. She isn't walking toward a destination. She is simply walking away. 2 blocks behind her, inside a second-floor apartment, the man she is running from is currently destroying their living room. This is the parallel reality of that night. Mark, her boyfriend, is in a rage fueled by cheap whiskey and insecurity. He throws a glass against the wall, watching it shatter, convinced that this is just another fight in a long cycle of dysfunction. He is pacing the floor, muttering to himself that Maria is dramatic, that she's just trying to scare him. He looks at the clock, 2:10 a.m., and tells himself she'll be back by dawn. She has to come back. Her 6-year-old daughter is asleep in the next room. Mark believes he is the villain of this evening's story, the monster Maria is fleeing from. He has no idea that his violence has just pushed her out of the frying pan and into a fire that will consume her completely. He thinks the worst thing that can happen tonight is a breakup. He is wrong. Back on the street, Maria's breath mists in the air. She has no phone, no wallet, just the desperate need to put distance between herself and the apartment. She is vulnerable, exposed, and the perfect target for a predator who knows exactly how to blend in. Enter Sergeant David Thorne. At 2:15 a.m., a Ford Crown Victoria turns the corner. It is a police cruiser, sleek and authoritative, moving with the quiet confidence of the law. Behind the wheel sits Sergeant Thorne, 38 years old, a man with a service record that looks impeccable on paper. To the citizens of this district, he is a protector, a father of 2, a man who coaches Little League on weekends. But the man in the cruiser has been doing something that doesn't appear in any shift report. Thorne has been dark for 90 minutes. He turned off his radio and disabled his location check-ins over an hour ago. He hasn't been patrolling. He has been hunting. He has been driving in concentric circles through the red light district and the lonely connector roads, scanning the sidewalks for someone isolated. He isn't looking for criminals. He is looking for an opportunity. When his headlights sweep over Maria Santos, illuminated against the dark backdrop of a closed factory, he slows down. He sees the distress in her body language. He sees the lack of a coat. He sees a woman who needs a savior. Inside the apartment, Mark finally stops pacing. He slumps onto the sofa, the anger draining away, replaced by a sullen confidence. He convinces himself that Maria is just walking around the block to cool off. He cracks another beer, turns on the television, and decides to wait her out. He doesn't know that he will never hear her voice again. On the street, the cruiser pulls up beside Maria. She flinches, her body tensing for a fight, until she sees the emblem on the door. Police. The relief that washes over her is visible even in the grainy distance. The window rolls down. David Thorne leans across the passenger seat. He doesn't look like a monster. He looks like a lifeline. He has kind eyes and a soft, practiced voice. He asks if she is okay. He asks if someone hurt her. For Maria, this is the answer to a prayer. She steps closer to the vehicle, wiping her eyes. She tells him about the fight, about the fear. Thorne listens with a look of professional concern. He is patient. He doesn't rush her. This is part of the ritual. He offers her a ride to the station, a safe place to make a call. At 2:17 a.m., the critical moment arrives. Procedure dictates that a civilian should sit in the back behind the safety cage. But Thorne unlocks the front passenger door. He gestures for her to hop in front, a subtle breach of protocol that masquerades as kindness. He wants her close. Maria doesn't question it. Why would she? He is a police officer. She opens the door and slides into the passenger seat. She closes the door, sealing her fate. The cruiser sits there for a moment longer, the brake lights glowing red in the darkness. Then, David Thorne puts the car in gear. He doesn't make a U-turn toward the police station. He drives straight ahead, toward the city limits, toward the deep, unlit stretches of the river road. Maria Santos has less than 30 minutes to live. As the taillights fade into the distance, the street is left empty and silent. Back in the apartment, Mark falls asleep on the couch, leaving the front door unlocked for a woman who is already gone. The sun rose over Chicago on Wednesday morning with a cruel, bright indifference, illuminating a world that had fundamentally changed for the Santos family. By 8 a.m., the silence in Maria's apartment had transformed from peaceful to terrifying. Maria's older sister, Elena, arrived to drop off groceries and found the front door unlocked, the living room in disarray from Mark's rampage the night before, and her 6-year-old niece, Sophia, sitting alone on the carpet, clutching a doll. Mark was gone, having fled the consequences of his anger, but Maria was missing too. Elena called Maria's phone 4 times, straight to voicemail. She called the diner where Maria worked. She hadn't shown up. A cold, heavy stone settled in Elena's stomach because she knew one immutable fact about her sister. Maria would walk through fire for her daughter. She would never, under any circumstances, leave Sophia alone. By noon, Elena was standing at the front desk of the district precinct, her hands trembling as she filled out a missing person report. She told the officer at the desk about the boyfriend, the violence, and the fear that something terrible had happened. The police, accustomed to domestic disputes where parties cooled off for a few days, told her to wait 24 hours. But Elena refused to leave the lobby until they took the file seriously. While Elena was pleading for help in the lobby, the man responsible for her agony was standing less than 50 feet away in the break room, carefully adding sugar to his coffee. Sergeant David Thorne had arrived for his shift 15 minutes early, clean-shaven and smelling of peppermint and starch. The transformation was absolute. The predator of the previous night had vanished, replaced by the model officer. He leaned against the counter, listening to a rookie complain about overtime, nodding with practiced empathy. When the watch commander walked in with a stack of new case files, including the initial report on Maria Santos, Thorne didn't flinch. In fact, he reached out and took the folder himself. "I'll take a look, Kappa," he said, his voice steady and helpful. "I was on patrol in that sector last night. Maybe I saw something." He opened the file, staring at the photo of the woman he had killed hours earlier. His pulse didn't quicken. He felt a surge of dark, intoxicating power. He was the fox guarding the henhouse, the monster wearing the mask of the savior. He sat in the morning briefing, notebook open, and listened as they discussed the potential domestic runaway, offering theories that directed suspicion squarely toward the violent ex-boyfriend. By day 3, the investigation shifted from a waiting game to an active search. The police, pressured by Elena's relentless advocacy, began canvassing the route between Maria's apartment and the main road. The breakthrough came from a residential security camera mounted on a porch overlooking a quiet stretch of 4th Street. The footage was grainy, shot in low-light night vision, but the silhouette was unmistakable. At 2:15 a.m., Maria is seen walking into the frame. She stops as a vehicle pulls up. It isn't a civilian car. The light bar on the roof is clearly visible in outline. The investigators huddled around the monitor watching the interaction. They saw Maria approach the car. They saw her body language relax. Then, they saw the anomaly that confused them. Maria didn't get in the back. She opened the front passenger door and slid inside. The car sat there for a moment, then the headlights were extinguished, plunging the vehicle into darkness before it turned sharply down a gravel service road leading toward the river, a place where no patrol car had any business going at 2:20 a.m. Thorne stood in the back of the room as the footage played, his face a mask of professional curiosity, while inside, he calculated his next move. The interrogation room was a claustrophobic box of gray cinder blocks and fluorescent hum, smelling faintly of stale sweat and desperation. Sitting in the metal chair was Mark, Maria's ex-boyfriend, looking every inch the killer the police wanted him to be. He was unshaven, volatile, and radiating a mixture of hangover guilt and defensive aggression. The detectives didn't need to work hard to find a motive. The neighbors had reported the shouting match. The broken furniture in the apartment testified to his violence, and his lack of an alibi for the critical hours between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. was the final nail in his coffin. When they pressed him about Maria's disappearance, Mark crumbled, admitting he had screamed at her, admitting he had thrown a glass against the wall, but vehemently denying he had harmed her. "She walked out," he yelled, slamming his hand on the table, a flash of temper that only served to convince the detectives they were looking at a man capable of snapping. To the investigators, the narrative was clean, simple, and statistically probable. The abusive partner escalated, the victim tried to leave, and he silenced her. The CCTV footage of Maria entering the police cruiser, which should have been the smoking gun that exonerated Mark, was instead viewed through the lens of confirmation bias. The lead detective watched the grainy video and shrugged it off, reasoning that a patrol officer had simply done a good deed, likely driving the distressed woman to a nearby bus stop or a friend's house to escape the domestic dispute. They didn't bother to track down which specific unit it was because they were so certain the danger lay back in the apartment, not in the vehicle marked to protect and serve. While the investigation zeroed in on Mark with the force of a freight train, Sergeant David Thorne was quietly, methodically derailing the tracks from the inside. He didn't need to interfere with physical evidence. He simply needed to poison the perception of the victim. In the break room, over donuts and coffee, Thorne would casually lean in when the detectives were discussing the case. "It's a shame," he would say, shaking his head with feigned sadness. "I used to patrol that sector a lot. You see women like her, sometimes they get mixed up in things to make rent. I heard rumors she was using again, maybe owed money to the wrong people." He dropped these lies like precision bombs, subtle, unverifiable, but devastating. He suggested that Maria might have a secret lover, a dealer perhaps, and that she had voluntarily vanished to avoid debt or start over. These whispers seeped into the official investigation, coloring how the detectives viewed Maria. She transformed in their eyes from a terrified mother into a flighty, drug-addled woman who might have just run off. This character assassination bought Thorne the most valuable commodity of all: time. Outside the precinct, the reality was a heartbreaking contrast. Maria's sister, Elena, stood before a phalanx of news microphones, her face wet with tears, holding up a picture of Maria hugging her daughter. "My sister did not do drugs!" she screamed, her voice cracking with the strain of grief and frustration. "She was a mother. She would never leave Sophia. Check the cameras. Find the officer." But her pleas were drowned out by the narrative Thorne had helped to construct. The media, fed leaks from the department, began to paint Maria as a troubled woman, shifting sympathy away from her. While Elena fought for her sister's dignity on the courthouse steps, David Thorne was busy in the motor pool garage, engaging in a much darker form of maintenance. Under the harsh glare of the garage lights, he stripped the interior of his cruiser, Unit 409. He told the mechanic someone had vomited in the back during a drunk and disorderly arrest, a common enough occurrence that no one questioned it. But Thorne wasn't cleaning the back seat. He was obsessively scrubbing the front passenger seat with industrial-grade upholstery cleaner. He worked with a meticulous, chilling intensity, scouring every inch of the fabric, wiping down the dashboard, and vacuuming the floor mats until not a single fiber of Maria's existence remained. He was erasing her from the world a second time, washing away her scent and her DNA while the rest of the department was busy building a case against the wrong man. November bled into December, bringing a biting wind off Lake Michigan that froze the city into a gray, shivering stillness. The investigation into Maria Santos's disappearance had officially gone cold, the case file buried under a stack of fresher miseries on the lieutenant's desk. But Detective Frank Halloway couldn't let it go. He was a dinosaur in the department, 60 years old, with nicotine-stained fingers, and a gut instinct that had survived 3 decades of Chicago's worst lies. He didn't buy the runaway theory, and the ex-boyfriend, Mark, was too stupid and too loud to have pulled off a disappearance this clean. Mark was a chaos agent. This crime smelled of precision. Halloway decided to look away from the people and look at the machines. He requested the AVL automatic vehicle locator logs for the night of October 14th. In 2008, the GPS technology in patrol cars was primitive compared to modern standards. It didn't provide real-time streaming video or second-by-second updates. Instead, it offered a series of digital pings that marked a car's location every few minutes, creating a connect-the-dots map of an officer's shift. Halloway sat in the dim light of the records room, tracing the digital ghost of Unit 409. The dots showed Thorne patrolling his sector normally for the first few hours. And then, at 2:25 a.m., the pattern broke. The data showed that Unit 409 had left the paved streets of the residential district and traveled down a service road near the Des Plaines River, a desolate stretch of mud and industrial runoff where no patrol car had any reason to be. The most damning detail was the timestamp. The vehicle had remained stationary at that isolated coordinates for exactly 45 minutes. 45 minutes in the dark. 45 minutes of silence. Halloway felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He printed the log, folded it into his pocket, and went to find Sergeant Thorne. He found him in the locker room, changing out of his uniform at the end of a shift. The air was thick with the smell of Old Spice and exhaustion. Halloway leaned against a row of metal lockers, playing the part of the weary old-timer. He didn't accuse, he just asked. "Hey, Dave," Halloway grunted, pulling out the paper. "I'm clearing up the paperwork on that Santos girl. Saw you were near the river that night. You sat there for nearly an hour. See anything?" The room went quiet. Thorne stopped buttoning his flannel shirt. He didn't freeze, and he didn't panic. He turned to Halloway with a sheepish, almost embarrassed smile. "You caught me, Frank," Thorne said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'd been pulling doubles all week. I drove down there to catch a nap where the lieutenant wouldn't see me. I was out cold for 40 minutes. Don't write me up, okay?" It was the perfect lie. It appealed to the universal exhaustion of the job, invoking the unwritten code that cops cover for each other's minor infractions. Halloway nodded slowly, putting the paper away, but his eyes remained hard. He walked away, leaving Thorne to finish dressing, but for the first time, the older detective didn't see a colleague. He saw a question mark shaped like a man. While Halloway wrestled with his suspicions, a far more visceral tragedy was playing out in the apartment on 4th Street. 2 months had passed, but for 6-year-old Sophia, time had stopped the moment her mother walked out the door. Every night, regardless of how cold the draft was, Sophia insisted on sitting by the front window. She held a ragged doll that Maria had bought her, pressing her forehead against the freezing glass, watching the headlights of passing cars. She had developed a heartbreaking ritual. Every time a car slowed down, she would perk up, whispering, "Mama?" only to slump back down when the vehicle passed. Her aunt Elena tried to coax her away with hot cocoa or cartoons, but the child's loyalty was absolute. Sophia didn't understand murder or kidnapping. She only understood that her mother had promised to always come back, and Sophia was waiting for her to keep that promise. The innocence of her vigil was a stark, crushing counterweight to the reality of what had happened in the river mud. Across town, in a warm, well-lit suburban house, the man who had orphaned Sophia was unlocking his own front door. David Thorne stepped into his entryway, kicking the snow off his boots. "Daddy's home!" he called out, his voice warm and resonant. 2 children, a boy and a girl roughly Sophia's age, came thundering down the hallway in their pajamas. Thorne dropped to one knee, opening his arms wide to catch them. He hugged them tight, burying his face in their hair, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and safety. He listened to their stories about school and drawings, laughing at the right moments, the picture of paternal devotion. Later that night, he went into his daughter's room to tuck her in. He smoothed the hair back from her forehead and kissed her goodnight, his lips lingering tenderly on her skin. As he turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, he felt no cognitive dissonance, no guilt gnawing at his gut. He could destroy a mother in the woods and then come home to nurture his own children, compartmentalizing the monster and the father so effectively that he slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the righteous. While miles away, a little girl watched the empty street and waited for a ghost. The breakthrough arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet metallic click of a seat rail being removed. It was late January, 3 months into the suffocating silence of Maria Santos's disappearance, and Detective Frank Halloway had finally secured the warrant to dismantle Patrol Unit 409 down to its chassis. David Thorne had cleaned the vehicle with the obsession of a surgeon, bleaching the upholstery and vacuuming the floor mats until they looked brand new, but he had underestimated the physics of violence. During the struggle inside the car, that brief, terrified moment, when Maria realized she wasn't being driven to safety, a small gold hoop earring had been torn from her lobe. It hadn't fallen on the floor. It had been jammed deep into the narrow, dark crevice between the passenger seat track and the center console, a space less than a millimeter wide, invisible to the naked eye and unreachable by a vacuum cleaner. When the forensic technician finally pried the track loose and held the tiny piece of jewelry up to the light, it was the loudest piece of evidence Halloway had ever seen. The lab rushed the DNA testing, scraping a microscopic sample of dried skin cells from the earring's clasp. The results were irrefutable. The genetic profile was a perfect match for Maria Santos. The probability of it being anyone else was 1 in 3 trillion. The ghost in the machine had finally spoken. The arrest was orchestrated to be as public and humiliating as possible, a calculated decision by the precinct captain to distance the department from the cancer growing within it. It happened during the shift change, the busiest time of the day in the squad room. Sergeant David Thorne was standing by the coffee machine, laughing at a joke made by a rookie officer, looking for all the world like the pillar of the community he pretended to be. The laughter died instantly when the double doors swung open and Halloway marched in, flanked by 2 internal affairs officers and the captain. There was no need for preamble. Halloway walked straight up to Thorne, his face carved from stone, and slammed the warrant down on the table next to the coffee cups. "David Thorne," Halloway announced, his voice booming off the cinderblock walls, "you are under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Maria Santos." The room froze. For a heartbeat, the air was sucked out of the space. Officers who had known Thorne for a decade, men and women who had trusted him with their lives during shootouts and domestic calls, stopped mid-motion. They watched in paralyzed disbelief as Halloway grabbed Thorne's wrists and twisted them behind his back, the handcuffs ratcheting shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. This was the moment the mask slipped. Most men, when caught, crumble into tears or shout denials. Thorne did neither. As the cuffs bit into his skin, his posture straightened, and the friendly, fatherly warmth evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, reptilian sneer. He didn't look at the floor. He looked directly at Halloway with eyes devoid of fear, filled instead with a terrifying arrogance. "You think you're solving a problem, Frank?" Thorne hissed, his voice dripping with condescension. "She was trash, a drug-addled drain on the system. I was cleaning up the streets you're too weak to police. I did this city a favor." The confession wasn't an admission of guilt, it was a statement of superiority. He viewed himself not as a murderer, but as a moral arbiter, a social cleanser who had the right to decide who deserved to live. He believed he was the cure, and Maria was the disease. The reaction in the room was a visceral, physical recoil. The blue wall of silence, that unwritten code of loyalty that often insulates police officers, didn't just crack, it shattered into dust. The rookie who had been laughing with Thorne seconds earlier looked like he was going to be sick. Officers turned away in disgust, their faces pale. They realized with dawning horror that the monster they had been hunting for 3 months hadn't been a stranger in the shadows. He had been the man sitting next to them at roll call, the man changing in the locker next to theirs, the man asking about their kids. The betrayal was absolute. Thorne had used the badge, the symbol of their honor, as a lure to trap a vulnerable woman. As Holloway dragged him toward the holding cells, there were no shouts of support, no calls to the union rep. There was only a heavy, seething hatred from the men and women in uniform, a collective desire to see this predator locked in a cage for the rest of his natural life. Thorne was hauled away, head held high in his delusion, leaving behind a room full of shattered trust and a badge that would never shine quite the same way again. The interrogation room was quiet, save for the hum of the ventilation system and the scratching of a pen on a legal pad. David Thorne sat opposite the district attorney, his hands folded calmly on the metal table, looking less like a man facing lethal injection and more like a businessman closing a merger. The DNA evidence from the earring was a noose around his neck, and he knew it. There was no way to talk his way out of a conviction for Maria Santos, but Thorne was a man who understood leverage, and he knew he held the one card the state desperately wanted, the location of the body. He looked the DA in the eye and made his offer with chilling pragmatism. He would give them Maria, allowing the family to bury her, but in exchange, the death penalty had to be taken off the table. He wanted life. He wanted to survive. The deal was struck in a hollow, airless room, trading justice for closure. 2 days later, under heavy guard, Thorne directed a convoy of police vehicles to a desolate stretch of wetlands south of the city, a place where the water was black and stagnant, choked with reeds and silence. He didn't show remorse as he pointed a handcuffed finger toward a patch of disturbed earth near the water's edge. He simply watched with detached curiosity as the forensic team excavated the mud, eventually revealing the tragic remains of Maria Santos. She had been hidden there for months, reclaimed by the swamp, but at least she was no longer lost. For Elena and little Sophia, the nightmare of not knowing was over, replaced by the finality of grief. But as the investigators worked to close the book on Maria Santos, a separate search team was prying open a rusty padlock on a storage unit 3 towns over, a rental registered under a fake name found in Thorne's personal files. Inside the dusty, corrugated metal box, amidst piles of old tires and camping gear, they found the true depth of the monster's history. Tucked away on a high shelf, hidden inside a nondescript tool chest, was a shoebox wrapped in plastic. It was a trophy box, a collection of souvenirs from hunts that had never been reported. The detectives opened it with gloved hands, expecting to find perhaps another item of Maria's. Instead, they found a graveyard of memories. There was a cracked leather wallet containing a Blockbuster video card from 1998. There was a tube of red lipstick used halfway down, a brand that hadn't been sold in stores for a decade. Most chilling of all were the driver's licenses. 3 of them. The plastic was yellowed with age, the expiration dates reaching back into the mid-90s. The faces in the photos were young women, smiling, unaware that their lives would end in the back of a patrol car. These were not random items. They were tokens of conquest, proof that David Thorne hadn't started killing with Maria Santos. He had been hunting for years, perhaps decades, using his badge as a lure and the city as his personal hunting ground. The discovery turned a single murder case into a serial nightmare. The trial concluded 6 months later in a courtroom packed to capacity. The air was thick with tension and the smell of polished wood and damp wool. When the judge read the sentence, life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole, a collective sigh rippled through the gallery. David Thorne stood motionless. He wore his prison jumpsuit with the same arrogant posture he had once worn his uniform. He didn't flinch at the sentence. He had expected it. But then, as the bailiffs moved to shackle him for transport, Thorne did something that froze the blood of everyone present. He turned his head slowly toward the public seating area. In the back rows behind Maria's weeping family sat a group of strangers. They were older parents, holding framed photographs of daughters who had vanished in 1995, 1999, and 2003. They were the families of the women from the trophy box and others who just suspected. They looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes, begging silently for a location, a name, a crumb of truth. Thorne locked eyes with a mother holding a picture of a girl with red lipstick. He didn't speak. He didn't apologize. Instead, he slowly curled his lip into a half smile, a smirk of absolute sadistic control. In that moment, he communicated a message clearer than any confession. I know where they are, and you never will. It was his final act of power. He accepted the prison cell not as a defeat, but as a vault where he would hoard his secrets until he died. Maria Santos was going home to be buried, but the others belonged to him forever. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut, sealing the silence, leaving the families in a purgatory that would last a lifetime. The story of Maria Santos leaves us with a chilling realization. True evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it wears a uniform. It smiles. It has a family waiting at home. Maria made a mistake that any of us could have made. She trusted the badge, believing that authority equaled safety. Her tragedy teaches us that predators are masters of camouflage, hiding in plain sight until it is too late. Please take this advice to heart. Your safety is worth more than politeness. If you are ever stopped by a lone officer in a dark area, or if something feels wrong, trust your instincts. You have the right to turn on your hazard lights and drive slowly to a well-lit gas station or public place. You can call emergency services to verify that the officer is legitimate before you roll down your window. Never get into a vehicle unless you have no other choice, and always let someone know where you are. We tell these stories not to spread fear, but to spread awareness. Please share this video with the women in your life, your daughters, your sisters, and your friends. Sharing this knowledge might just save a life one day. If you want to see more stories that give a voice to the voiceless, please subscribe to our channel. We live in an unpredictable world. I pray that God watches over you and your loved ones. May He guide you away from those who wear false masks and protect you from the dangers you cannot see. May you always find your way home safe. If you wish for this protection and for peace for the victims who are still waiting to be found, please type Amen in the comments below.